Hey everyone, today we have a GE front load washing machine in our shop that's having some issues. This is one of the newer style front load washers from GE. If you open the door, they typically have the blue door gasket in them, as well as the ultra fresh fan gills up here at the top. The model numbers are GFW 510 through PFW 950. The problem we have today is when we try to run the load close to it, it will not operate. So I want to show you start to finish on what we need to look for in this design and how to fix it. And when it comes to the parts needed to replace this, if you can support the channel by buying through us, it does help me make more videos. I bought this washing machine broken just so we could learn to fix it for you. So let's get to it. On this washing machine, if it stops mid-cycle or it stops shortly after the initial turn-on process, there's usually 2 or 3 major areas of concern that we want to look at. The first thing is that we want to get into diagnostics on the machine and pull error codes and see what the machine thinks is going wrong. To do that, ensure that the unit can be turned on and making sure that nothing's on the screen and the dial hasn't been pressed. Then to access the error codes, press and hold the start/pause button for approximately 10 seconds. After you've held it onto it for 10 seconds, you should see the interface light turn bright. Then all the lights will flash and it'll look like what you see here. To cycle through the error codes, press the start/pause button to run through everything. And sadly, this is a brand new control board, so there's no issues here. So here's another washing machine that does have error codes that we used back in the day. If you keep pressing the start/pause button, it will scroll through all the potential codes that could cause the machine to shut down. I do have a video for all the codes possible on this machine. But what's happened is since that video, we've seen a few particular problems with certain codes, so we're going to focus on those today here. Here's a list of the major codes we want to deal with today in the video, as these are the most likely failures to cause your washing machine to stop mid-cycle, but there's also a few other codes we're going to go through as well in the process of diagnosis. Other possible codes are in the other video I mentioned just a few moments ago with the blue washer, and there is going to be a code sheet in the description for everything else. I also have a few other videos dealing with control board and drain pump issues on your unit, and I'll have a playlist at the end for all those videos. But we want to confirm that the inverter motor is bad because that is the most likely culprit, and this is how you can do that without taking anything apart if you found an error code resolving to those issues. From the error code mode, press the start button to put it back into standby mode. With the unit plugged in and nothing on the screen, press and hold the start/pause button. Then with your other hand, rotate the control dial 180 degrees counterclockwise until the dial is in the exact opposite position of where you started. You can even go 1 notch further in the opposite direction, then release the start/pause button. If you do this right, all the lights are going to flash on the control board. Then you can rotate the dial clockwise to activate various forced modes of operation. In this case, we want to turn the dial to mode 14. Again, make sure the unit is ready and the door is shut. You have the drain and water hoses to the machine correctly. Once you press the start button on the machine on option 14, the door is going to lock, the drain pump will run, and the washer will attempt to begin to spin. Now here's the key. If the unit only spins 4 to 7 seconds, then stops, your inverter motor assembly is overheating and gone bad and it needs replaced. With that in mind, we're going to go ahead and tear the unit down to replace the inverter motor, but let's go over some of the other codes that you could have seen and what you would look for in the process of getting down to the motor, because we can fix those things pretty quickly too. The tools that you want to have for this is a Phillips head screwdriver and then a multimeter. And for that multimeter, I do suggest very thin leads to tap and test the control board if you want to find some of the root culprits of these difficult fixes that we're going to do. In addition, you would want a 14mm socket wrench and then a door boot spring tool. And then finally, a pair of needle nose pliers or slip-jawed wrench if you have to get underneath to do some fixes to the drain pump. To start to disassemble the washing machine for inspection, you need to remove the dispenser box. Pull it out as far as it will go, then press the tab on the left side of the box and pull the box fully out. Locate the next 5 screws in the soap dispenser housing. 3 are on the left, 2 are on the right. Use your Phillips head screwdriver to remove them, and I suggest to make sure it has a good magnetic pull on it. Make sure to note the location and orientation of the screws. Some are fine thread and others are coarse. Once you have that done, lift up on the left side of the interface about 15 degrees. Then pull it forward to unlatch it from the bulkhead. There are then 3 screws behind this interface at the top of the lid. Use a screwdriver to remove those 3 from the washing machine. And when you have those 3 removed, you can pull the top towards you and then off away from the washer, revealing the very top of the unit. With the top off, this is the accelerometer that could have caused some of the error codes early during the spin test. In general, the main concern is that the wire harness could have potentially come loose or unhooked, and if that was the problem, simply make sure to reinsert the harness as firmly as possible. Now, if you check everything and it's still throwing accelerometer error codes, the accelerometer itself may be needed to be replaced, and I'll have a link to that in the description of the video. But let's go ahead and look at more faults on the machine. Open the door of the washing machine and take a Phillips head screwdriver or a drill gun and remove the 2 screws on the right side where the door lock are. Then remove the faceplate of the door lock assembly. Then remove the 2 screws that hold the door lock in place. Remove the door boot seal wire. You can use a thin bladed screwdriver to gently pry it away from the door gasket. Roll the door gasket around and away from the bulkhead. This will allow you to access the damper system and the door lock. With these screws undone, you can lift the lock up and out through the gasket like you see here. This will let you inspect the door lock assembly for any damage to it. You can remove the harness and test it. And for reference, I have a video showing you how to do that on the ultra-fast combo washer dryer, which is identical for this door lock. One key to look at other than the lock itself is the harness of the lock system. Make sure to inspect the wires for any breaks. There is an identical harness on the left side of the door that you can get to without taking the door off, but you can't actually show it on camera. So we'll go ahead and take the bulkhead off and then show you what that looks like and some of the issues you could have with the wire breaking there. There are 3 screws at the bottom of the washing machine, so you need to either tilt the machine backwards against a wall or put a small piece of wood underneath that will let you tilt the machine slightly to access these screws on the bottom. You need to use a drill gun or screwdriver and remove the 3 screws from the bottom of the machine. And if you tilted the machine against a wall or with wood, go ahead and seat it back on the floor. Next, there are 9 screws on the top of the machine, 2 that are facing forward on the very corners of the unit, and then 7 pointing downward on the bulkhead. The 3 middle ones deal with the damper fan, so when you have those removed, you can slide the fan to the rear and uncouple it from the bulkhead using the inside where we had removed the gasket. You can then lift up and forward on the bulkhead to begin the removal process. As a note, that door harness can often have a bent, broken, or snapped wire that could have caused weird door lock issues that would possibly result in that main board failure, and you should inspect the wires on both the door lock on the right side and as well as the wires on the left side where you could swap the door orientation if needed. Once you have that door off, you have 2 options here on what you can inspect, the inverter motor and the drain pump. However, to do either, you may want to have more access to them, and that requires you to use a 14mm socket wrench to remove the 4 screws that hold the counterbalance weight at the bottom on. I would recommend you hold the concrete weight when you remove the last screw, as it could pop off, although the concrete rests on the pegs somewhat, so it isn't going to fall off magically. From here, you can replace the drain pump if you want. I have a dedicated video on how to do that, and I will link to it at the end of this video so we don't replicate the same video twice. I do carry the replacement drain pumps though at my store, and one key to note here is that if the drain pump is bad, you won't find any strong resistance on the plastic impeller motor when you spin it. You should feel 3 to 4 strong areas on the pump. On the multimeter, it should have 20 ohms of resistance. If the washing machine had any of the error codes with the inverter, it's almost always that the board itself is bad, and the board inside the box, the inverter, otherwise sometimes called a motor control board, needs replaced. And to start to take it apart, you need or the Phillips head screwdriver. These boards require you to remove cable ties, the cover, and wire harness from underneath before you can actually remove the board to replace it. There are 6 small pieces that keep the cover on, so you need to use a small screwdriver or needle nose pliers to slowly rock the cover back and forth to remove it. This is not easily shown on camera, but is not very hard to do. Once the top cover is off, you can work to remove the 4 wire harnesses from the inverter board. You then slowly will want to work the wire trunks out of the assembly, and then once it's done, you can fully remove the inverter motor and the back of the board itself from the washing machine. The inverter has 2 small clips on the edges that need unhooked, and then there are 4 screws that hold the board into place. These all need removed before you can take the board out of the plastic housing, much like the main board. As of this video, there's only one kind of inverter board for essentially all the GE front-load washing machines of this style. Once you have it out of the packaging, it's just going to seat and house one way back into the unit based on how the screws are oriented. Put all the screws back into place with a screwdriver, and don't forget the 2 small retainer clips that will pop the housing back into place. Now, before we put the inverter board back into the housing, One thing to inspect are other wires that go to the inverter or the motor itself behind the inverter system. It's possible that a wire has been bent or damaged, causing the codes on the washing machine. It's rare, but does happen, so I would inspect everything here. If this was the case, the wire trunk would need either replaced or repaired. Usually the damage would be right around where the wire harness plugs in or where a cable tie is. In case you can't find an issue back to the inverter though, you need to seat the board back into the washer, install the 4 wire harnesses back into the board, then route the wires through any of the holders that the board has and put the cover on. This is hard to show perfectly on camera because of how tight and poorly lit the space is, but it's pretty straightforward on where the wires go. And there's no real wrong way to do this. Remember to check for wire breaks. When the wires are installed, slowly work the board cover back onto the inverter assembly, and when that's done, guide the inverter back onto the chassis and slide it into place. Reinstall that screw and the push mount cable tie back into place, and when all those steps are done, you should have that brand new working inverter in place, which is the cause of many issues on this style unit. For the final stages in reassembly and testing, given how these washers are, I would suggest the bare minimum installation to make sure it works. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the counterbalance weight, which is easier to do when the machine is tipped over slightly because there's not 40 pounds on the machine prior to the counterbalance being put back on. I'm going to reinstall the door wire on the left side and slowly work the front back onto the bulkhead. There are 4 plastic pegs that the front sits on for the bulkhead, and then the door latch on the right side needs seated into place. There's a small hook that it will rest on. From here, if you're comfortable with it, you could test the spin mode using the diagnostic mode and see how it spins. I would also suggest using command number 16. It will clear all the failure codes on the machine by pressing the start/pause button. From here, you could reassemble the washing machine and run other tests, or if you feel lucky, leave it here and just try to root out any other failure codes that pop up when you try to run the spin test. But chances are, if you only got one series of codes from one single part, it should have been resolved now and the machine is fine. Let's go ahead and finish reassembling the machine by installing the 3 screws to the bottom of the washing machine with it tilted slightly backwards. Make sure that the door lock is in place, and then install the 2 screws to the lock and then the 2 that are on the cover on top. I'm going to slowly go ahead and reseat the damper fan into the housing at the top of the bulkhead, then slowly work the gasket around the lip of the washing machine. This is a little tedious. If you need to, use some dish soap to coat the inner lip of the gasket. It can make this job a little bit easier. The door boot spring is next. These GE units have a much wider spring than other brands, so typical spring tools don't work. I have a video where I used cable ties and a wrench to solve this. I'm using a different tool here that actually works really well, and I will have a link to it in the description. Carefully place it back into the seam of the gasket like you see here. And if you haven't done it yet, install the 8 or 9 screws on the top of the unit. One goes into the left and then one into the right side of the corners of the washer. That much wider screw going into the far right side of the console. If you unhooked any of the surface mount cable ties, go ahead and plug them back in. The washer lid is next. It slots into place with the 4 plastic pieces that secure the lid in place. It will only slot one way. Then you have 3 screws that hold the lid into the console bulkhead. Finally, slot the console into place. On the right side, there are 2 very wide head screws that the console kind of pivots and snaps into from right to left, and if put in place properly, it just all snaps and fits together. You have to insert the 5 screws to the dispenser housing. I like to pull the blue dispenser towards the front of the unit when inserting the screws. It should go very snugly together, securing the console and dispenser to the bulkhead. Then reinsert the dispenser into place. Everything should now be done and fixed. Hopefully this video helped solve your unit stopping during operation and not spinning. Again, this video focused on issues mainly around the inverter board and things surrounding it, because the inverter is by far the most likely issue. If you needed the inverter board or any other parts, make sure to check the links in the comments for the items, and make sure to check the other videos in the playlist for more troubleshooting tips on these GE machines, as I have a few videos now. Have a great day.